That was kind of our whole idea going into this, I guess, is like, yeah, what's the worst that could happen? Like, it doesn't work. It doesn't happen for us, and then we're in the same position that we were. Like, we could
Yeah.
really be no more humiliated than we have been already. Let's give it a shot.
That is Em Cassel, co-owner and editor at Racket, and I'm Joel Lehman. Welcome to Connection Request. If you've seen headlines about the media industry this year, chances are none of them have been very positive. According to Axios, we've already hit a record number of media job cuts in 2023 at more than 17,000 as of June 1st. And with digital media darlings like BuzzFeed News closing and Vice Media filing for bankruptcy. But amidst that very bleak outlook, there are smaller, more niche outlets that are not only finding their way but succeeding. Well, that's why I wanted to sit down with Em Cassel, a co-owner and editor at Racket and the final editor-in-chief of its predecessor, City Pages, a beloved alt-weekly newspaper right here in Minneapolis and Saint Paul. We talk through Em's career that brought her to Minneapolis and chat about that fateful day in 2020 when the Star Tribune decided to fold City Pages entirely. We also discuss how Em and a few colleagues decided to start a publication from scratch, and nearly 2 years in, how it's going, and what really makes for a Racket story. Along the way, we chat about Tezande, spam, rotisserie chickens, and an anonymous commenter named Taco Mike, and why it's important to listen to those pushes from the universe every now and then. Stick with us until the rapid fire where I grill Em on some of her favorite food and beverage spots in the Twin Cities right now. I also force her to choose between Minnesota icons Bob Dylan and Prince. We go deep on both media and Minnesota, but I think there's a lot to be learned for all of us from the way she's approached her career. Okay, here's my conversation with Em Cassel. Em Cassel, welcome to Connection Request. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited.
Of course, me too. So let's get things started. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely happy to. I guess going way back, I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia, small town called Percy. I don't know that anyone has ever heard of it who's not from there. I I was interested in journalism kind of from a young age. We were definitely like a household that gets the newspaper every Sunday and like shared and traded off pieces of it among one another. I don't know how common that is at all anymore, but it was pretty common, I think, when I was, 10 years old.
Yeah.
People still did that. Um, and so I also knew from a pretty young age that like that was something that I was interested in, that I liked. I was a very bookish child. I liked reading. I liked, the written word really spoke to me from the time I was very young. And as I was getting older, as I was in high school, we didn't have a really robust student paper or anything.
Hmm.
So I was kind of feeling it out as I went, whether a career in journalism might be something that I wanted. Um, I felt like it was a safer alternative to like having an English degree.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hilarious looking back. I don't know that a journalism degree is any more marketable than an English degree at this point, but
Yeah.
at the time it seemed like it was. Um, and Also, I like my favorite thing about journalism to this day is just like being able to ask people questions. I was like a very curious, know it all kind of child. And there's like nothing more gratifying than knowing that you can just email someone or call them up and they have to answer you.
Yeah.
So I went to school, journalism school at Northeastern in Boston, and graduated with a degree in a little under 4 years. It's a funny school. It does like this co-op program where you um, take breaks, like 6-month periods where you're not in class and you work in your chosen field, ideally. So I did that for a bit, and yeah, that's what kind of like started everything, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, so let's then go back to like after journalism school. So tell us about like those first few years and I guess the pre-City Pages days as we'll call them for now.
Sure. Well, Northeastern is in Boston, which is fun for a lot of reasons. I think Boston's a really cool city. I liked living there during the time that I lived there. But it also has this kind of like it's a double-edged sword of like there are a ton of college students there, which
Hmm.
means that when you graduate at the same time as a ton of other people with journalism degrees. So you find yourself in a very crowded media market. And that can be a real challenge if you don't already have a foot in the door somewhere or kind of know someone, or just have the time and financial ability to do unpaid internships. Even with the work experience from Northeastern, it didn't feel like I was getting calls back. I wasn't getting interviews. It just wasn't working. So for a short period of time, I went to work for a company that does content marketing.
Hmm.
That was like, I don't know, a compromise that I made. I was like, well, I'll be writing.
Yeah.
I'll have a steady job, which was very important. It's an expensive city as well.
Yeah.
And uh, and it just seemed like, this will be great basic experience. This will be like a boot camp. I'll be doing lots of writing about lots of different types of things. What's the downside? And the downside was that you're writing like 5,000 words a day about software as a service
Yeah.
for various B2B clients. It's not fun. I didn't enjoy it. And so I did like for the first time in my life, I like quit a job with no backup plan. I was like, I can't keep doing this. It's sucking
Yeah.
my will to live.
Yeah.
Um, so I ended up going back to work in a bookstore. I had worked part-time at a bookstore slash cafe when I was in school, and they were looking for a full-time bookseller. And I was just like, you know what? This seems like a sign. They need someone full time. I need something full time. I'll end up back at the bookstore,
Hmm.
which definitely felt like a step backwards at the time. Like I was not sure if this was really the right idea or if I was
Yeah.
being kind of a baby. I will say that when I quit the content marketing job, my manager thanked me for quitting and not just ghosting because I guess that was very common. So I felt a little
Interesting.
validated.
Yeah. I mean, it
um,
seems like you were listening to yourself, which to me, what you can validate, but seems like a theme you did throughout your career. But like you were just like, you didn't want to be there, and you just did it. And I guess sort of at the time that felt like the best decision. But
100.
like months into making that, did it still feel right? And were you freelancing on the side?
Yes, that was the really great thing about sort of taking a step back was like I wasn't burnt out from writing tons and tons of words, for other clients.
Hmm.
I was able to get out of here. Sorry, it's my cat. I was able to, uh, take the time that I needed to, like, work from 8 to 4 and then have an evening where I didn't feel so burnt out and tired.
Yeah.
I could do some freelancing, so I did some stuff, for very, small publications, like a magazine for drummers and, some stuff for the online, like, youthful component of the Boston Globe's
Hmm.
boston.com vertical. And that actually started to feel maybe like this was progress, like, okay, this step backwards was maybe not a step backwards,
Yeah.
maybe being able to take time to write the things that you wanna write is actually, if not a step forward, at least a sideways step.
Totally. Totally. And so eventually, I imagine that lands you at Scout. Is that the name?
It
Yeah.
does, yes.
Okay.
I had a coworker at the bookstore, named Emily Hopkins, who this is just, like, one of those random things that happens in life, but, they were also a recent college grad with a journalism degree who wasn't finding work in, like, a meaningful way in
Hmm.
journalism. So they were the events manager at the bookstore. I was the head bookseller. We became very close. And they got a call from a friend about this position opening up at these local magazines called Scout. Um, they were like hyper local magazines, one in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and one in Somerville, Massachusetts. But they wanted ideally two people
Hmm.
working kind of part time to fill these roles. So again, by like sheer happenstance, this like sidestep slash backstep ended up being a
Yeah.
thing that propelled me forward. Through
Yeah.
Emily and through that bookstore job, I got the connection that gave me my first quote unquote real journalism job,
Yeah.
which was great.
And you were there for a while, right? What was that experience like? And as you came more part of the place, was that good? Were you writing the things you were wanting to write? How was it?
It was definitely a enlightening experience. As anyone who has worked, I think, in like alternative media and specifically like hyper local media will tell you, it's like there are a lot of the issues there that are true elsewhere in the industry. Like you're gonna work long hours and the pay is not gonna be incredible. But the payoff is that you're writing stories about everything. You're doing all kinds of stuff. Like we were our own editors, photographers,
Yeah.
videographers sometimes. Like you learn a lot. Um, and it feels better than doing something that's like, writing about, again, software as a service or something like that, where
Yeah.
it's like, this has no long-term value for me. This is gonna go on a web page and then disappear, and no one will ever see it again. It felt like this is a tangible thing. I'm writing and editing a real magazine that goes out to people's homes, that they see, that they experience, and that they have a really strong relationship with. So that
Yeah.
felt really good. Like, it was challenging and stressful in the ways that those jobs are.
Mm.
Um, but I think, unfortunately, you shouldn't probably be in media if you don't want it to be a little challenging and stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and then eventually 2017, tell me if I'm skipping too far forward.
No, that's perfect.
Something brings you to Minneapolis and to a beloved alt weekly here, City Pages. How did that happen?
Absolutely. That too was a really funny, almost circumstantial, like happenstance kind of serendipity. I had another friend, Gerard Fagerberg, who, if you're a reader of City Pages or of Racket, where I am now, you might recognize his name. He was a longtime beer writer who also wrote about a lot of other stuff for those
Yeah.
publications. And he had moved from Boston to Minneapolis a few years earlier,
Mm.
had been doing some writing for City Pages and really loved the city, was like a very big advocate for Minneapolis.
Yeah.
He also knew that I had kind of become disheartened with Boston. Again, all these things of like expensive city,
Yeah.
hustle, tiny little apartment, working a lot of hours, and it doesn't feel like you're maybe getting anywhere. And he let me know that City Pages had a food and drink editor position opening up, which I was not a food and drink writer at the time. I think I said something to him to the effect of like, "I eat chips for dinner. I don't know if I'm qualified for this." um, and I actually, the first time around, I didn't apply for the job. He was kind of like, "Here's the link. I think you should do it. I think you would love it here. I feel like this is a good fit for you."
Yeah.
And I was kinda like, "I don't know, like, Minneapolis is a little far away,"
Totally. Middle of the
I'm
country.
not, super experienced with the realm of food and drink, so, it seemed like a little much, but
Yeah.
again, and just like you get these weird pushes from the universe sometimes, and the first person that they had hired for the food writer job ended up falling through. Like they had a personal life event or something where they were not going to be able to take the job.
Mm.
And that's when Gerard reached out again and was like, "Hey, I just want to tell you, I know you didn't apply the first time around. This first person fell through. I really, really think that you should consider applying for this job." And that was the push it took. I was like, "Okay, it feels like maybe I should apply for this job. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe I'm getting some signs here that I really should." And I did.
Yeah.
And a few months later, I was flying out to Minneapolis to meet the staff and see if it would be a good fit. My introduction to the state of Minnesota was going to the Minnesota State Fair, so that
Heck
was
yeah, it was. But that was a wild introduction.
truly like you're gonna get it all at once. I will never forget the feeling I felt the first time I saw the all you can drink milk stand. I was like, "All right."
Hopefully with a bucket of cookies in your arm as well.
Yes.
What and so I mean that feels like a real universe moment of like you turned it down the first time. And the second time it's like, no, you should really do this even though you only eat chips for dinner. When it happened and it all came through and you came, like did it did it feel like a big jump, a big risk, a big scary thing, or was it just like, yeah, let's like see what happens? I don't know. Like, and readers will note you've now been here ever since, right? So
Yeah.
you've built a both a career and I presume a life here.
Yeah.
Yeah, how's that been, and how did it feel at that time?
Um, it was kind of both things at the same time. Like, on one hand, I was scared and nervous and excited and all of those things. Like, I hadn't, I'd lived in Pennsylvania and I'd lived in Massachusetts, and all of my friends were on the East Coast.
Mm,
And there's just the general uncertainty anytime you start a new job that's kind of
yeah,
like, will this be the right choice? Will I feel confident? Will I be good at it? And then you compound all of those anxieties with like, and also you're going to move to the Midwest and see how you
totally,
like that. um,
totally.
so there was a lot of, fear, anxiety, but definitely also excitement, kind of fluttering around inside. And, as you mentioned, I'm still here now. The Midwest absolutely got me. If the Minneapolis like tourism board needs any tips, I'm your girl.
For sure.
Very quickly felt very at home. I think like the City Pages staff was incredible. That was a really wonderful group of people to fall in with.
Yeah.
I I experienced a bit of the sort of, famous Midwestern standoffishness, or specifically the Minnesota nice that you
Hmm.
hear about, but I also think, there's a lot of people here who are very open to connections and meeting new people and making new friends. And,
Yeah.
I've said this before, but I feel like if you just force your friendship on people, just invite yourself to their things and don't just wait to be invited, you'll find that
Yeah.
Minnesotans are a kind and sweet people.
That's a good tip. That's really interesting. How was your time there? I mean, you, at least from your resume, experienced like a really interesting rocket fueled rise. I mean, you had a couple different gigs and then ended up being the editor in chief. How was your time there? And in terms of career progression, at least from the outside, it seems like a place that offered some of that.
Yeah, it absolutely was. That was one of the things that I was honestly a little concerned about, in addition to just the move and taking the job the first time, was like, well, if I'm the food and drink editor, like there's not a lot else I can do from there, right? I was like, I'll
Yeah,
be a section editor. Surely I won't be the managing editor at any point. Like, looking at it as an outsider, I was like, this is probably where I'll be for a long time, and that's
sure.
okay. And I was at City Pages for a long time, but yeah, within I think 2 years of my being there, our managing editor left for a role with the Star Tribune. I ended up interviewing for and got her old position. All of this was very unexpected and like just again a thing of like right place, right time.
Yeah, yeah,
And then yeah, within another year, our editor in chief had left, and um, that role I was really uncertain about taking. I was like, well, it's that's a lot of
that's
responsibility.
the
I
big
know.
one.
Yeah, that's that's like its own thing. But I did end up applying for and getting that role as well, which I held until the pandemic shut the paper down. So first and
Yeah,
last woman editor in chief at CP.
yeah, we'll get to that. How was it going from being a writer and a reporter to managing and leading people? How did you like that aspect of the job?
There were things that I liked about it. Certainly, when I was managing editor, part of what I liked is that I was still writing. I was contributing to the website. I was occasionally writing stuff for the paper. There were managerial duties that were my own that involved writing from, just a day to day basis. So that was really valuable. I will say, like, I personally prefer the actual writing and editing that goes into it and less the like bureaucratic stuff, and the
Yeah,
budget management and the people management even is its own thing,
totally.
where it's it's maybe not what I would say is like my favorite part of
Yeah,
the job. It's something that you could do, but I like definitely looking back, I'm like, oh man, I kind of loved it when I was just in the trenches, like writing blog posts all the time and doing a weekly story as opposed to the kind of big picture stuff that can feel
Yeah,
a little bit harder to just wrap your head around or grasp.
that makes sense. I noticed your Instagram bio says you have highly personal and easily misunderstood goals. Care to shed any light on what that means and or what some of them are?
I would love to. The quote comes from a song by the band Self Defense Family, who I really like. If anyone
Okay.
never heard of them, they're wonderful. And I've always just very much resonated with that line because I think it's like it's very personal. I think part of what I really love about it is that it it means like you can have goals that are your own,
Hmm.
that you don't have to like be plastering the world with like I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and whatever else. Like your goals can be deeply personal to you
Hmm.
and they can be things that aren't necessarily like the traditional goals that you might think of as like a steady job, like good career, lots of money, big house, all
Yeah.
of these things. Like I think some of my personal and misunderstood goals are like, you know, I want to live a life and work in a career that feels fulfilling, whether or not that is the thing that makes me the most money,
Yeah.
whether or not that's even a thing that like has a nice retirement account at the end of it. Like
Yeah.
I think I think some of the things that I enjoy most about this life are the things that make it worth living now and not things that you are putting off towards some like unpromised future.
Yeah.
So I try to live that way with my career, with my relationships, I would say like having strong friendships and like really robust social networks, like those are goals of mine
Hmm.
that I think also are like maybe not things that we necessarily think of when we think about long-term goals, but like for me, those things are deeply important.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Let's go to the day that you found out City Pages was shutting down. It was
Um,
during a pandemic. It was in
mhm.
2020. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep,
And
that I think October,
for
November.
loads of reasons that you can get into or not, you found out that this place that you had moved across the country for
No.
and built a career at and became the editor in chief of was shutting down. Tell me about that day
Mhm.
and then the next few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it was horrible at the time. Like, so I'm sure anyone who's like a manager or has managed people before knows how strongly you feel about the people that you're managing. Like that is your team, those are your people. You really, really want to do right by them and you really want them to succeed and have their
Yeah.
best life. On top of that, with City Pages, we were all so close personally, like as friends. We spent time together outside of the paper, going to trivia nights and whatever else. Like it was a very close group of people. And so to hear not only that your team is disbanding, but you're all losing your jobs. We're talking about like your acquaintances, friends, and colleagues.
Yeah.
You're also seeing the end of an era in terms of a publication that meant something to the whole Twin Cities. So it's like
Absolutely.
it's just so sad on such a variety of levels. I Every time there are layoffs in media and it feels like we hear about them constantly anymore, it takes me right back there to, like who's oh gosh, we're all losing our jobs today.
Yeah.
Like there's no feeling like it. Nothing prepares you. You know, I think the vast majority of people who go through layoffs like this have a similar experience where like you get a surprise meeting invitation that's like an all hands on deck and it was the video chat era and you all
Yeah.
log into the video chat and then all of a sudden by the end of the call you find out that you're all no longer employed there. It was really, really hard. I had never experienced anything quite like it. I don't think anyone on the team had ever experienced anything quite like it.
Yeah.
It's awful to navigate and
Yeah.
ugh, it feels like an indictment of the work that you've done. It
Hmm.
feels like what if we had just tried harder? What if we had, I don't know, like, there's nothing any one person on that team could have done. It
Yeah.
was a really, really hard time. And the decision that the Star Tribune, which owns City Pages, made was to shut down the paper. We weren't able to do anything about it. I will say that in the coming weeks, well, almost right away, the day that we got the news, there was a kind of idea of like, well, what if we did our own thing? What if we,
On the day. It's
yeah,
like as
yeah,
soon as
day
yeah.
of it, like nothing came of it for some time, but even
Sure.
on the day, there was a lot of, speculation from the staff of like, well, okay, I don't want to go work for the Star Tribune and I don't want to go
Yeah.
work for the Pioneer Press. Like, we're not really cut out for that kind of daily grind journalism stuff anymore. We want to do weird stuff and we want to do fun stuff and
Yeah.
we really want to be chaotic and have a strong voice and all of this. So even on that first day, there was kind of like, well, what if we just did our own thing?
Hmm.
Um, and nothing came of that for some time. I think we had to kind of sit back and like lick our wounds for a while. And,
Yeah.
it's like a big life moment. Like those are times where you sit back and you think about like, okay, like what do I really want? Like, speaking for
Yeah.
myself, like, do I really want to be in Minnesota? Like, do I really want to be in media anymore? Like, these are
Totally.
the times to ask those questions. And for myself and for a handful of my colleagues, the answer was both like, yes, we do want to be in media still. And also, yes, we do want to try and do something not entirely unlike City Pages.
Hmm.
So I think it was December of 2020 that I sent an email to the whole staff and I just said, hey, I know some of you have moved on already. I know, it probably won't be practical for others, but I'm just curious, like, does anyone still want to explore this idea of like, what if we started our own worker owned media company? Does that
Yeah.
interest anyone? And
Yeah.
a few people were interested.
Yeah. And that, I mean, so that, let's see, had that idea or sent that email in December and then you launched the following August. Yeah. If I have my
Yeah.
timeline right.
Yep.
Um, yeah. What did that time period feel like? You got a couple of people who said, yeah, this sounds good. At some point, I know you call up the folks at Defector who had
Mm.
done something similar. So walk me through from the day you send that email, a couple of people say yes, and then less than a year later, you launch.
Yeah, it was a pretty condensed timeline. One of our very earliest steps was emailing the folks at Defector because it just what we wanted to do, both spiritually and on like a practical, like how will this be built level, seemed very much in line with what they had done when Deadspin shut down and a bunch of really talented writers with a lot to offer said, great, no problem. Actually, I guess Defector didn't, Deadspin rather didn't shut down. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
all very in the media weeds. But in any case, when
Yeah.
they
Yeah. Yeah.
all left Deadspin, and they went to find create defector, it seemed like there was an opportunity there for us to ask them some questions, and so we did. And you know they had a lot of great advice, kind of the nuts and bolts stuff of how they did it. And I think the thing that told us like we should just do this is like Tom Lay, who's the editor-in-chief over there, sort of followed up with my colleague Jay Buller and I after our conversation and said, I was thinking more about your situation and I really think there's no downside. I really think you guys should do it. Like
Hmm.
he was like, what's the worst that could happen? And that was kind of our whole idea going into this, I guess, is like, yeah, what's the worst that could happen? Like it doesn't work. It doesn't happen for us and then we're in the same position that we were. Like we could
Yeah.
really be no more humiliated than we have been already. Let's give it a shot. Um, so yeah, we connected with the folks at Ali Lead, who were the people who built Defector's website. They've done a lot of really cool startup journalism projects for other, papers around the country. And basically, over the course of around 8 months, we came up with the name, the logo, the ethos, the website. And yeah, by that August, we were publishing content.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing. And I just think like, yeah, like not every journalist or person in the media profession is like destined to also be a startup founder,
Mhm.
which you are. And so I think the fact that you like took a really bad thing and turned it into a really cool thing is, from where I sit, pretty amazing.
You.
Yeah, of course. Like, yeah, how did it feel then, I guess, like hitting go on the website on August 2nd, I believe, and the only reason I remember that is because that's my wedding anniversary.
Oh.
And then a couple weeks later publishing the first article. Like, were you like, oh my god, I hope this works? Were you terrified? Were you like, we got this, we've been publishing forever? Like, what did that feel like to all of a sudden ask a bunch of people for money and eyeballs?
Um, Definitely the thing that we were telling ourselves over and over, and, just sort of saying like a mantra was like, "We've got this. We've done this before. We know what we're doing. This will be fine." But the, sort of subconscious feeling for sure was like, "Wow, I wonder if this will work. It could be a huge flop.
Yeah.
No one might subscribe. People might actually think this is stupid."
Yeah. It's a
There was
scary
like
thing,
there
right? To like
Yeah, for
build a new
sure.
brand, build a new company, like even though you had the backing of a really passionate like audience that theoretically you could
Yes.
convert to mix a few different turns of phrase, like yeah, still it's like a that's a hard thing to do. Put yourself out
Totally.
there.
And, with the way that we run Racket, it's mostly reader funded. It's like 90% reader funded, which is such an inversion of the alt weekly model and of the model
Yeah.
that we had at City Pages. Like, we were really going out on a limb saying like, okay, people liked this when it was a free paper that they could pick up at the bar while they were like waiting for a friend.
Yeah.
Will they find enough value in it that they chip in, $5 a month or $10 a month to read it in an online format? Like, we really didn't know.
Yeah.
Even seeing the success of Defector and other, kind of reader supported journalism startups, you don't know how it's going to translate for
Mm.
your publication and specifically for like your media market. Like, maybe it works in New York, maybe it works
Yeah.
wherever else, but will it work in Minneapolis and St. Paul? Tough to
Who
say unless
knows?
you just try.
Yeah. Yeah. Um So actually, we should for anyone listening to this or watching who has never heard of Racket and maybe doesn't know anything about alt weeklies, because that like not everybody does. Can you give us the pitch for Racket? What
Totally.
is it that y'all do, and maybe a little bit about alt weeklies too in general?
Absolutely, yeah. So the all weekly ethos is like traditionally speaking, they are a literal alternative to like the daily paper in your community. So, you might get one line from the sort of traditional news outlet, and then from the alt weekly, you're gonna get the take that's maybe a little bit brasher, maybe a little bit more um confrontational, and doing stories that you don't see reported in the big dailies. I think that's
Yeah.
really where alternative weeklies thrive the most. The phrase that you often hear associated with them is that they should comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I think that's a very sort of succinct way of putting the whole kind of feeling behind it. So when we started Racket, we knew that we wanted that alternative ethos to kind of sink into everything that we did. Um, it was not going to be a print publication, and it was going to be a daily blog, but it was going to be infused ideally with those alternative ideas. And it was kind of a funny thing in explaining it to like specifically the people who were helping us with our branding early on. Like, they would be like, "Well, what's the tone?" And we'd be like, "Well, it's like simultaneously very serious and like deeply researched
Mm.
and really thoughtful and careful, but it's also really funny, and there's like an emphasis on the writing being clever and the stories being weird and being things you wouldn't see elsewhere." Like, it does feel like it's really kind of a thing of dichotomies when
Mm.
you get down to it.
Yeah.
um but the end of the day, what we want to be doing, what alternative papers do very well, and what I hope we continue to do well at Racket is to be worth reading, to be something that is engaging, that is fun, that is interesting, that is thought provoking, eye opening, all of those cliches. Just the stuff that you're not necessarily seeing elsewhere.
Yeah.
When we talk to people about what makes a good Racket story, the simplest way we can say it is like something that you're not going to read elsewhere in the local news universe. That's what we want to be bringing to the table, and what I hope we are bringing to the table.
Yeah, well, at least it took me this long to get a disclosure. I am a subscriber and a reader, and at least for this subscriber and reader, you're definitely doing that. Um, what are some of the favorite pieces y'all have done in the first almost 2 years now? I've got my own. I think my hands down favorite that I've read is probably the Tezande piece, just because
Oh God.
it's like the perfect intersection of like this internet character from a long time ago that I and no one, I assume, no offense to him, have thought about in a very long time.
Mhm.
And then we get the local angle. But what are some of your favorites?
Yeah, I will just add that that Tay one was wild. Like, we did not anticipate that his answers were gonna be so thoughtful and, like,
Yeah.
really interesting and, like, just totally
Yeah.
unexpected.
I still think about it all the time.
I know. I think some of my favorites, well, the story, I'll let you in on a little, like, analytics data here.
Sure.
The most popular, the most read Racket story of all time is still when we did our ranking of the local grocery store rotisserie chickens.
Oh my God, that's
That
amazing.
remains unseated at the top of the charts,
So good. I
which
love it.
again, yeah, felt like a very specific Racket
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that I've been really proud of is even within the last couple months is like last month I took a ride with a bike bus in Minneapolis, which is like a parent-led group of students on bicycles who go to their elementary school in like a big group that's almost like critical mass or like one of those like street takeover kind of ideas, but it's just like 10-year-olds on their bicycles with their parents. That kind of stuff was really fun to report because it's like at the intersection of a lot of things that we really care about, which is like like transportation equality and like cyclist rights, and also just like it's a cool story about kids doing something neat.
Yeah.
So I really liked that one. You shared this story earlier today, but my deep dive into why it is that more local chefs don't appreciate spam when it is from here.
Great
Uh,
piece. Which, by the way, careful readers will note you wrote 2,000 words about spam, but I don't think disclosed your own relationship and personal preference of spam. Do you like
I
spam? Do you
I
eat
am a
it?
spam fan, but
Okay,
I'm a
cool.
late in life spam fan.
Yeah,
I will add that I grew up in Pennsylvania, which means that we ate like pork roll and scrapple, so I'm like well versed in like kind of weird meat byproducts, and spam is
that's a very
there.
niche area. Although I was really surprised to learn that 17 million households, and
I
specifically like in
know.
other countries,
I
um,
was really shocked by that too, and just the fact that it's, like, becoming more and more popular over time, like, the last several years have been record-breaking one after the
yeah.
other, like, never would have known that until we started reporting the story.
Okay, we are deep down the spam rabbit hole now, but and I had this question for later, but will the Racket international budget allow for you to go to Spam Jam, the Hawaiian spam festival, or to send a local freelancer to cover it? Because
Man, it
I'd
would be
really like to
great.
see that.
Another really successful story from our first year was, the writer Ian Ringenberg went to, Winnipeg. He had, like, a viral tweet about how it's weird that Winnipeg is, like, 8 hours north of us, and we just never talk about it. It's, like, this huge metro area that no one thinks of. And that was a really fun report, and people really read the heck out of it, so maybe a report from Spam Jam is in
Yeah,
order.
I'm just that's my pitch to you. You know how it goes. I'm happy to do it if you need someone to. What about? I mean, so we're talking about relatively lighter, funnier topics right now, but you
Mhm.
also, I think, a lot of readers first came to you for the great NPR investigative
Yeah.
piece.
Yeah.
We talk a little bit about that one, and also like how do you think in your head of the mix of spam manifesto, chicken rotisserie competition, and then like workplace deep investigative piece, like that. I think all those things sit on Racket, mn.com or whatever your website is. Yeah. How do you think about that mix?
Yeah. Well, the NPR investigation specifically was one of those things where, like, every once in a while it feels like there's a story that everyone is kind of talking about, but that no one is reporting on. And we just kept noticing all these really high profile departures from NPR.
Yeah.
And it was like one after another, where it just seemed like a really rapid exodus from the station and from the company. And you know, pairing that with things like them shutting down really successful investigative journalism programs, like it just all seemed to us like it was painting a picture of, maybe a media environment that was not super healthy or
Yeah.
super yeah, like maybe things just weren't going so great behind the scenes. And so my colleague Jay spoke to, I think, around a dozen current and former NPR employees to just kind of paint this picture for people of like what is going on behind the scenes here. Like, what are we not seeing
Yeah.
that's causing this exodus of talent? That's causing the shutdown of these popular programs. And that, again, I think that's a story that probably a lot of other publications in town aren't going to touch,
Right.
either because they have, personal connections with NPR, or, because they just don't want to get into it. It's messy. It's
Yeah.
a messy
Yeah.
story. But that one also did huge numbers for us, and I think is one that we're really proud of for that exact reason, and that it kind of
Yeah.
challenges the narrative of this like robust nonprofit, commercial radio station, and says like, they have problems like a lot of other organizations do, and
Yeah.
they're struggling with them. In terms of how it all fits together, that's a great question. The way that we kind of think about it is it's not like a super well thought out formula. It's more like, okay, we've had a lot of silly stuff lately. We need to do some serious stuff.
Sure.
And vice versa. If we've had a couple weeks in a row where we've had very serious features or stories, we're like, okay, we can like goof a little bit
Yeah.
here in the coming weeks. But it all kind of is happening at the same time. We're typically reporting a handful of stories simultaneously. So, you try to juggle it all, keep all the silly and serious balls in the
Yeah. Yeah.
air.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on behalf of the Racket Readers Association, keep it all coming, all of it.
Good, good.
How I'm curious, the if I understand right, the model of ownership. There's four of you that describe yourselves as co-owners and co-editors. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
And how do you make decisions when four people? I mean, I know there's a thing now, right? Like reader and writer owned media, right? How does it work? Like, you all must get along pretty well and have great trust and respect for one another. But even so, even in the best of terms, and
Mhm.
everyone gets along great in terms of setting strategy and making decisions
Yeah.
and running stories and paying freelancers. Yeah, like, how's that work?
That's probably the thing that's been like both most interesting to navigate, and
Yeah,
also it's been, I mean, surprisingly, knocking on wood here, it's gone very well so far. But when we set up the company, we didn't know like, okay, so we do this four-person ownership structure. Everyone just takes, 25%. We'll all make the same amount of money. We'll all theoretically have the same amount of say so and the same amount of responsibility. Um, it's a complicated thing. We have a weekly meeting where we discuss any things that are like, this is a little bit beyond like my scope. Like, we all have
yeah,
kind of our little like buckets that we're
yeah,
managing. And then we'll have a weekly meeting where we discuss pitches and ideas. And then also like, I have this thought. What do we think about this? We've been really lucky that so far we've kind of all aligned on things, at least enough that we can
yeah,
stomach it if it's something that we're like, well, I'm not super gung ho about this, but if you three all feel really strongly that this is, the story to pursue, or this is the
yeah.
way that we should be focusing our efforts moving forward, like no one has gotten to a point where they're like, well, I'm gonna blow this up over this or whatever else. And we haven't
Hmm.
gotten into too many positions either where it's like two against two, which would theoretically come up at some point, and we'll
Yeah.
cross that bridge when we get to it. But
Let the
we've,
readers decide on those ones. Just put
yeah,
it out.
exactly. Just
Yeah.
put a Twitter poll.
Yeah. 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 Yeah,
for
exactly.
real. But yeah, I think we all have a really similar experience, just in terms of like having spent a lot of time in alternative media. And we have a lot of experience in journalism in general. Like Jessica worked at City Pages, my coworker Jessica Armbruster, for like 20 years. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of time and experience. She has seen a lot of stuff go down for better and worse at City Pages. And I think, our driving principle at this point is like, how do we make the best publication that we can make with the resources that we have for the readers who have given us their time and
Yeah.
money? Like,
Yeah.
and when you think about things from that standpoint, if that's like kind of the leading idea behind everything, I feel like you end up on the same page a lot just by virtue of like, well, this seems like it's the best thing for the health of the publication, or it's the most interesting thing for the reader. It kind of solves itself a lot of the times.
Yeah. Okay. I've got 4,000 more questions to ask you, but I want to be really mindful and respectful of your time today. I've got a
Sure.
couple more and then a rapid fire round that I think could be kind of fun.
Cool.
Um, if I wrote you a blank check to go and tell a story, what story do you think you'd go and tell? Doesn't have to be for Racket. I know you have a great freelance career as well. But what story would you go and tell, and what format would you tell it in? Doesn't have to be print.
It's a really fun question. Well, I can say for sure that the way I would approach it would be in print or the digital equivalent of print.
Sure.
I'm a written word person. I don't do
Yeah.
great with video and audio. So I think it would definitely be print. In terms of the story that I would want to tell, something that we don't get a huge amount of opportunity to do with Racket, just by the nature of the fact that our staff is very small and we're all based in the Twin Cities, is like to do a ton of exploring beyond the confines of the Twin Cities.
Hmm.
So like something like the spam story, like even, driving an hour and a half outside of the
Yeah.
city to go visit the spam museum is like something that, I had to do on a weekend, and then you take all that time and everything else and you end up doing a lot of stuff after hours. I think I would love to be able to tell more interesting stories from beyond like the Twin Cities specifically. Like, what did the food and drink? I often, as you know, edit food and drink for
Yeah.
Racket to this day. So like, what are the food and drink scenes like in some other smaller towns or the suburbs,
Yeah.
or like, places like, I feel like we do a pretty good job of covering food and drink here in the Twin Cities. I would love to do some kind of like big tour of the state that took more of like an all-encompassing look at what's
Yeah.
going on out there.
You should just hire that TikTok food guy, because I feel like he goes
Yeah,
everywhere, right? I
he
feel like he
does.
could do that in a heartbeat. I love that
Yeah,
answer though. That makes a lot of sense.
I would love that.
Um, okay. Have you read by chance Ben Smith's book Traffic?
I have not.
Okay, no worries. It's Ben Smith, former editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed News, for
Sure.
listeners and for everyone else, currently founding editor at Semaphore. I just finished that book recently, and so I've been thinking a lot about just like that book basically follows Gawker and BuzzFeed from inception kind of through to now, or like whenever he finished writing the book. And then when you sort of get to the end of it and then add sort of the past year of media layoffs, and BuzzFeed News itself shutting down, and Vice, and all these sort of like really well-known digital media brands from, let's call it, the past decade plus, that haven't survived. And some of that I think we found from stupid money, low interest rates and crazy valuations and all sorts of things. But I don't know, it leaves me on the whole feeling a little bit bleak about digital media generally. That
Yes.
said, not to put the weight of journalism and democracy on your shoulders, but there are sort of smaller, local, and oftentimes like defectors and local, but there are other versions of how to build a modern sustainable media company and to build a career in digital media. I'm just curious, as you think about kind of your life in journalism thus far, and also journey from an alt weekly eventually owned by an established brand to now owning Racket. I don't know how do you feel about the state of digital media, I guess, is the question I'm really trying to ask you.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, it does feel very bleak right now, and I
Yeah.
do feel very concerned about the state of media, both like in on a national scale, like with the big layoffs at some of those big publications, and also like probably in a more dire sense in a local scale with like Gannett buying up tiny newsrooms and then
Yeah.
slicing them down to one or two reporters and then maybe shutting them down entirely. I think the whole thing paints a very, very grim portrait. And I don't know what the answer is necessarily. I feel like the real answer is, like, legislation that would stop Gannett from doing something like that, or,
Yeah.
like, it needs to be bigger than just, like, every time a newsroom shuts down, 3 or 4 people with the time and energy are like, "Okay, we'll start a new thing." Like, there has to
Yeah.
be something more there. Um I do find it very heartening to see publications like ours and like Defector and like the Baltimore Beat is an amazing one in Baltimore. There's the Colorado Sun, which same kind of deal in Colorado. Like
Yeah.
there are a lot of places where newsrooms have shut down and really wonderful things have cropped up in their absence. But in terms of, how sustainable that is for the future, I don't know. I wanna believe that more and more people could do it if they knew that it could be done, and we are like if anyone who listens to this is like, "Oh, I've always wondered about that," and maybe someone at Racket would tell me how they did it, we would love to, like, really walk you through the nitty-gritty, like, nuts and
Yeah.
bolts stuff. We picked a ton of people's brains as we were getting this thing off the ground, and we have happily answered questions from other people who've been
Yeah.
interested in doing it since.
I mean, almost 2 years in, do you feel bullish on Racket's future?
Yeah, on Racket specifically, I feel great.
Good.
We do an annual report, like we did one last year, we'll do one this year where we kind of like take people through the subscription numbers and the traffic numbers, and the advertising and how everything is going behind the scenes. And we release it in July, so soon. So I just started pulling some sort of
Mm,
preliminary numbers and stuff for that. And it's looking really good. I mean,
good.
we're still making a living. All of the numbers are going in the right direction.
Good. Glad to hear that.
So yeah, I mean, I feel very confident. One thing that I think I I just feel very strongly that these publications can exist and they don't need to be things that make like a huge profit for some billionaire somewhere, right? Like Tom Lay at Defector again gave a big, they just had a big feature in the Columbia Journalism Review. And a point
Yeah.
that he made that I thought was really good and very salient and very much relatable to us was like, you know, we aren't trying to do like a Barstool Sports and get bought by a big media group for like a couple $100 million.
Yeah.
Uh, it's more akin to like the neighborhood bar where like we just need to be there and to keep the lights on. We don't need
Yeah.
to be turning huge profits. We don't need to be looking good on paper for some eventual buyer.
Yeah.
We need to keep doing good things for our community and continue existing for our readers and supporters and contributors, and that's really it.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm I mean, in that respect, I think the simplicity is really beautiful, right? Like
yeah.
it's actually getting back to the basics of just business, right? Like we just want to keep going. None of
Yeah.
us are looking to get filthy rich off of it, and
Nope.
that's all we're asking for. We don't need to invent metrics to look good to a VC.
Nope.
We're just like right, like we care about like 1 to 2 metrics or whatever, right? That are really important to us, and subscribers is one of them. That's
Yeah,
great.
and it feels nice to be able to be the person or the people who are in control of that. Like
Yeah.
we don't have, a business guy who's asking us questions about, well, why did you invest X and Y in this and why did you spend this amount on this? Like at the
Yeah.
end of the day, we just have to answer to ourselves and to our readers. And if we feel good about, what we're doing and what we're publishing and what we've been spending, I feel good about that.
That's pretty cool. Can I keep you for 2 more minutes to
Yeah,
get through the
yeah, go
rapid
for it. I
fire?
have this
Yeah?
is what I've got this afternoon, so go
Okay,
ahead.
wonderful. All right, let's move into the rapid fire then, and then I will let you go and get back to writing, reporting, and editing. First question is, have you tried Borg?
I have not tried Borg, and you know what? We talked about what if we hosted a Racket Borg party,
Uh,
which
it's a good idea.
I feel like
Just
sometime this summer we might try to make that happen.
yeah.
I really want a Borg, and I've already
Yeah.
got my Borg name picked out. I want it to be Charlotte Gainsbourg.
Okay.
So,
I love that. You heard it here first, folks. That's some breaking news. Love that. I have not tried Borg, but definitely intrigued.
yeah, I mean, I think
Uh,
if you're an adult person, it's probably there are very few opportunities to bring a Borg.
yeah.
Definitely the kind of thing that would maybe instill some concern in your friends and loved ones. So
But if Racket hosts a party, then it's fine,
it's
right?
different.
That's yeah. It like puts a whole veneer on it that makes
Yeah.
sense. Why do you love VHS?
I started collecting VHS tapes when I was just out of college. It was like a fun thing to do on a weekend to like bike around to a bunch of thrift stores and like record shops and just grab tapes. We had one of those like hulking old televisions that still had a built-in VHS player. And
Yeah,
so that's how we spent, I mean, again, in terms of like being a broke young person in Boston, like you really can't get more bang for your buck than like buying a VHS tape for 99 cents and then
yeah.
watching it with your friends.
So
So
true.
it started just that way. And then I don't know, I've come to be very nostalgic about it. I love sitting down and watching the previews and seeing what was coming soon to own
Hmm.
on video and DVD. And I just feel like they're almost like a little time capsule of a very
Yeah.
specific moment. And we just watched over the weekend, some friends and I, Dirty Work, the Norm Macdonald classic on
Hmm.
VHS. And it just feels like that's the way that movie is supposed to be viewed.
Yeah, I love that. Uh, you're inspiring me to think about my own media collection habits. Have you continued to live your life free of Amazon Prime since you
Ugh,
first
no.
reported on it?
I did
Jeff
really
got you,
well.
huh?
I
Like,
did really well for a really long time. But
yeah,
speaking of like media diets, I feel like Prime Video has some of the best stuff.
yeah,
And so I don't get a lot of stuff delivered to my house. Like I very rarely order something on Amazon,
yeah.
but I watch Amazon Prime a lot.
Yeah, for listeners who have no idea why I'm asking some of these questions, I feel like a lot of context is needed. But Em wrote a great piece a few years back about like if you wanted to break up with Amazon and Amazon
Mhm.
Prime, some other ways that you could do that. Um, yeah, that's one of those things that I will be honest, I have never given it up, despite many wonderful people and examples in my life like giving me good reasons why I shouldn't. And it's just so damn convenient.
I know,
But
and it's really hard to argue with. Like I
yeah,
get it. I even when I wrote that story, I was trying to be very careful about like this is not a judgment of you if you do use it. Like it's
totally.
so easy. You can get so much stuff and especially if you like don't have a car or you have like a job and a family, like there are a
Yeah,
ton of reasons that using Amazon Prime can make your life so much easier. It's just like if you wanted to use it less, here
totally.
are some tips.
And also like regulation could be a thing to make that company a lot better. Just
Totally.
saying.
Again.
Yeah, just saying. If any legislators are listening,
Yep.
any idea who Taco Mike is, the most popular Racket commenter?
I will not reveal his identity, but I will tell you that within the last several months, I had drinks at the spot bar in Saint Paul with Taco Mike.
Wow.
I
Okay.
know. It was a real Matt
Okay.
Goff moment.
Good. Any details to reveal about Taco Mike? Anything that surprised you compared to his internet personality to his
Well,
IRL personality?
let's think about this. There were things revealed that we already sort of knew from his commenting persona. So, like, we knew he was a North Sider.
Sure.
Knew he was a big movie guy. We
Sure.
are actually letterboxed mutuals now.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
Generally speaking, he was really tall. That was the most surprising
Hmm.
thing to me.
Interesting. Taco Mike, if you're listening and have an interesting career and want to come on Connection Request, you are welcome to. Okay, you were of course the food editor at City Pages, and as you mentioned, you still do a lot of that. So I'm wondering if we could get a few of your favorites, and it doesn't need to be your all-time favorite, but just like
Sure.
some places that you're loving in the following
Mhm.
categories. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
Pizza.
Um, Brixworth. That's
Mm.
like a recency bias thing, but I
You
just went
just wrote
there
a
for
piece
their
about it.
little square
Yeah.
pizzas, and I've been really into them
Yeah.
lately.
It is pretty good. Okay, how does Brixworth, do you think, compare to, in my mind, the sort of equivalent, which is Rectangle?
Rectangle. Yeah. They're almost neck and neck for me. I will say there's no pizza at Brixworth that I love quite as much as the shredder from Rectangle, which is
Mm.
that like hot honey and
Yep.
like
Yep.
pickle and amazing pizza. I
Yep.
just really, really like that one specifically.
Yeah.
But I feel like across the board, I was kind of like, this is a fun new thing, and I
Yeah.
really like the Brixworth pies. And
Okay.
also in my own neighborhood, I have to shout out Good Times Pizza,
Mm.
which is a delight.
Okay, wonderful. What about a coffee spot?
Um, I don't get coffee out nearly as much as I used to. I really like Wildflyer
Mm.
because I end up spending a lot of time on Minnehaha, either like buying books at Moon Palace or
Yeah.
getting VHS tapes at Heroic Goods and Games. So I'm at Wildflyer kind of a lot. I think another favorite coffee shop is probably just the standard, like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
no,
really have another more favorite one.
that's okay. Close listeners of this show will note my love for SK Coffee, so I'll go ahead and plug
Oh, sure.
them. You can listen to Sam on an earlier episode, who's the
They just
founder and
opened
owner.
in what, Uptown?
Yes, their
Yeah.
second location, which as a Saint Paul native, I feel a little bit jealous that Minneapolis now gets to experience them too, but it's okay and good for them.
No, can't have everything.
Cocktails?
Okay, several thoughts about this. I really, for like a fancy little night, I really like the Emerald Lounge in
Mm,
Saint Paul.
here, here.
That is such a fun little spot. I feel like the food is really great. But the cocktails specifically to me are a lot of fun
Yeah,
and kind of
some great,
weird.
really great NA cocktails there too.
Mhm.
I'll say, like
Yeah.
really well thought out
Yeah.
and stuff.
I have been a huge fan of that spot. It's become like my favorite little like treat spot.
Yeah, yeah. Love it. What about like a restaurant for a date night?
For a date night. Well, what kind of date are we trying to have? Is like a first date? Like a
No, couple who's been together a while
couple
and
of
they
people
want to
together?
go like sort of splurge night. I don't know.
Okay. If we're doing a splurge night, I really like All Saints in Northeast,
Hmm,
which is like they do a lot of wood-fired stuff, like really good vegetable cooking, and it's like feels like a little bit elevated, like it's definitely approaching like a fine dining kind of atmosphere, but the prices are really good and you can
sure.
order a bunch of stuff and just kind of share it. We've done like a lot of like friends' birthdays there for like a group of 4.
Yeah.
Um, really like
Okay,
All Saints.
cool. And what about so we're still in sort of food and beverage generally, just like an underrated spot, right? Like people aren't talking about it enough, writing about it enough. I don't know.
Yeah, that's funny. We did a story last year that was like the 12 most underrated bars,
Yeah,
and
that was a great
I
piece.
that was a lot of fun, but it did get me thinking that we should do the same thing for restaurants, and I've kind
Mm,
of like been mulling that idea over, like what are the
mm,
most underrated restaurants in the Twin Cities? And it's tough because I feel like a lot of them are appropriately rated. Like
sure.
I'm trying to think of the ones where I'm like, man, that place really deserves more credit. A lot of them fall into kind of the dive bar, like neighborhood bar
Yeah,
category.
yeah.
I wish I could
How
think
about
of one that's like
how about this?
really good.
Listeners will just need to subscribe to Racket and or a free newsletter to make sure they get your answer
Our
to that question.
eventual
Your
forthcoming
eventual
story.
piece, either underrated or appropriately rated. That would be
Appropriately
kind of funny
rated.
too.
It is a
Perfectly
question that
mediocre places.
yeah, like what's just fine? I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's really funny. Okay, and finally a round of this or that. Are you ready? Don't think
Mhm.
too hard.
Okay.
Prince or Bob Dylan?
Bob Dylan.
Editor or writer?
Writer.
Mats or 5/8?
Mats.
Print or digital?
Digital.
Minneapolis or Saint Paul?
Minneapolis, I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
that's fair. We can still be friends. And City Pages or Racket?
Gotta go for Racket.
I mean, I figured. Where can folks find out more about you if they want to and follow your journey from here?
So if you want to follow me, I am Bike Trouble on most social media platforms. I would encourage you to check out racketmn.com if you want to read what I'm writing. That's racketmn.com. And you can also follow us on all of our social media. Those are listed there. We have a number of free newsletters that go out every week. You should subscribe to those. And
Agreed.
yeah.
Cool. Well, Em Cassel, thanks so much for joining me today on Connection Request.
Thanks for having me, Joel.
That is it for today's episode of Connection Request. Please send me all feedback, questions, pitches, and takes on the end of Succession and Ted Lasso to connect@shrugcontent.com. Today's show is, of course, produced by Shrug Content. We make podcasts, websites, and other internet-related content. You can learn more at shrugcontent.com. And you can find me, Joel Lehman, on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and the show on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Until next time, be well, and thanks for listening.